AITA for feeling resentful and expecting financial help from my wealthy mother and uncle who inherited millions after my grandfather's death. For as long as I can remember, money has always been a sensitive topic in my family, at least for me. Not because I've ever had a lot of it, but because everyone else in my family seems to have it in spades. My family isn't huge. There's just my mom, stepdad, uncle, and a few distant relatives who don't play much of a role in my life. We're not a big, sprawling clan with cousins and nieces running around. It's a small circle, which sometimes makes the differences in our situations feel even starker. The smaller the group, the harder it is to ignore just how wide the gap is. To paint a picture of my family, my stepdad is a very successful businessman. He's been wealthy for as long as I can remember, and honestly, I don't think I've ever seen him stressed about money. Growing up, I remember how he'd casually talk about stocks or business deals over dinner, conversations that might as well have been in another language to me. There was always this aura of security around him, like nothing could touch him financially. I don't think he's ever had to worry about things like an unexpected car repair or a late bill. My mom, on the other hand, was a teacher for years. She worked hard, but teaching isn't exactly the kind of profession that sets you up for early retirement. That all changed when she married my stepdad after her divorce from my dad. Suddenly, she didn't have to worry about stretching a paycheck or figuring out how to budget for the month. Thanks to his financial stability, she was able to retire almost a decade earlier than most people can dream of. She went from grading papers late into the night to traveling, gardening, and doing yoga at her leisure. On top of that, she also gets a check every month from my dad's retirement fund because they were married for over 20 years, and apparently that's how it works. I didn't even know that was a thing until she mentioned it in passing one day, like it was no big deal. She said it so nonchalantly, but all I could think about was how that monthly check alone is probably more than what I make in a few weeks. She didn't really have to fight for it or do anything extra. It was just handed to her as part of the divorce settlement. Then there's my uncle, who hasn't worked a day in over a decade. Most of his income comes from inheritance money left to him by my grandfather, who passed away a few years ago. My uncle, by all accounts, has always lived a pretty comfortable life, and the inheritance only amplified that. He doesn't really have to think about money beyond deciding which luxury vacation to take next or which high-end gadget to buy. It's like he stepped into this role of wealthy retiree without ever really having had a career to retire from. My grandfather, on the other hand, was the complete opposite. He was incredibly disciplined when it came to money. A high-ranking military officer, he served his country with pride and retired with a rock-solid pension that most people can only dream of. But he didn't stop there. He had a real talent for investing. Whether it was stocks, real estate, or other ventures, he always seemed to know where to put his money to make it grow. He wasn't flashy about his wealth, though. He lived modestly and worked hard his entire life, making sure that he left something substantial behind for his family when he passed. When my grandfather died, he left my mom and uncle a hefty sum of money along with a portfolio of investment properties. It was a windfall, to say the least, and neither of them really had to do anything to earn it. The properties were in high-demand locations, practically guaranteeing a steady income from rental profits while they decided what to do with them. Recently, they sold my grandfather's primary residence, which had been in the family for decades. It was valued at just under $2 million, and it sold quickly. It was bittersweet, but mostly for sentimental reasons. Financially, it was just another big payday for my mom and uncle. Now, they're in the process of selling the remaining properties he left behind, commercial investments that are set to bring in another $1 million or more. On top of all that, my stepdad recently decided to offload one of his own investment properties. It wasn't just a small rental home, either. It was a high-value piece of real estate that sold for over $1.5 million. He's already planning his next move, talking about reinvesting the proceeds into an even bigger and better property, as if this was just another game to him. For him, real estate is more than just an investment strategy. It's like a hobby, one that continually generates massive returns. What strikes me is how effortlessly all of this seems to come to them. My uncle hasn't had to lift a finger to maintain his lifestyle because the inheritance provides more than enough. My mom and stepdad, meanwhile, are playing in the big leagues of real estate, casually making deals worth millions of dollars as if it's just another day. Meanwhile, I'm over here calculating how much I can spend on groceries this week without cutting into next month's rent. The disparity is hard to ignore. So here's where I come in. I'm almost 30 years old, a single parent to a wonderful little kid, and currently working and going to school to finish my degree. My days are packed with balancing work, school assignments, and taking care of my child. Some nights I'm so exhausted that I can barely stay awake long enough to finish studying, but I keep pushing because I know I need that degree to have any hope of a better future. I've never been married, and honestly, I'm not even sure when or if that's going to happen. Marriage isn't exactly a priority when you're juggling as much as I am, though sometimes I can't help but think about how much easier it might be to have someone to share the financial burden with. My financial situation, let's just say it's not great. I'm doing my best to stay afloat, but most days it feels like I'm treading water. I work hard, but despite my efforts, I'm stuck renting a small apartment in a not-so-great part of town because that's all I can afford. Most of my paycheck goes toward rent, child care, groceries, and bills. Every dollar is accounted for before it even hits my bank account. Saving for a down payment on a house, that feels like an impossible dream. Some months I can barely scrape together enough to add anything to my savings, let alone save the thousands it would take to even think about buying a home. What bothers me the most is that it wouldn't take much for my family to help me out. I'm not asking for them to hand me a mansion or bankroll some extravagant lifestyle. I don't need granite countertops, walk-in closets, or a fancy backyard. I just wish they'd consider helping me buy a small, modest home, something stable where my kid and I could feel secure. A place we could call our own without the constant worrying that the rent might go up or the lease might not be renewed. A couple of months ago, I tried to broach the subject with my mom, not directly asking for money but more as a casual comment. I said something like, "It feels like people my age will never be able to afford a house unless they have help from family." It wasn't a plea or a demand, just a general observation about how hard it is for millennials to get into the housing market these days. Her response: she just shrugged and said, "Well, you have to work hard, save up, and maybe find a good partner to help with expenses." I don't think she even realized how tone-deaf that sounded. Here she is, sitting in her fully paid-off home, a home she didn't have to work for, or by herself sipping her coffee from a cafe she visited during her last European vacation. I could still see the tan from her trip, and she was wearing a bracelet she'd bought at some market in Italy. Her life is so far removed from the reality of my struggles that I don't think she can even comprehend how dismissive her words felt. It was like a slap in the face. How can someone who has never had to scrape by, who's never had to choose between paying a bill or buying groceries, tell me to work hard as if that's not what I've been doing all along? And the part about finding a partner to help with expenses. It felt so outdated, like a throwback to a time when women were expected to rely on a husband for financial stability. I'm doing this on my own, and while it's hard, I don't think it's fair to suggest that my solution lies in finding someone else to share the burden. That conversation has stuck with me ever since. It wasn't just what she said, it was the way she said it, so casual, so matter-of-fact, as if the solution was simple and I just wasn't trying hard enough. It made me realize how out of touch she is with what my life is really like. I don't think she understands how much pressure I'm under or how much I'm sacrificing just to make it from one month to the next. And it's not just her. My uncle is the same way. He spends his days golfing, traveling, and making little snide comments about how millennials don't want to work anymore. This is coming from someone who hasn't worked in over a decade and lives entirely off inherited money. It's almost laughable when you really think about it. He's the one who didn't have to earn his wealth. He didn't have to fight for any of it, yet somehow he feels entitled to judge the work ethic of an entire generation. It's like he's completely oblivious to the fact that people my age are working multiple jobs, going into debt for school, and trying to make a living in an economy that's stacked against us. It's hard not to feel resentful. I've been busting my ass for years, trying to make a life for myself and my child with no handouts, no shortcuts. I'm constantly pushing myself to do better, to be better, to give my kid the best life I can without any help from anyone. I've sacrificed so much along the way: nights out with friends, vacations, even simple luxuries like buying a new pair of shoes without stressing about the cost. Every penny I spend feels like it has to be accounted for, and every purchase requires careful thought. Meanwhile, my family, who has the means to help me, chooses not to. It's as if they can't even acknowledge that I'm struggling or that I'm working my ass off just to make ends meet. I keep telling myself that it's not their responsibility. I'm an adult. I made my choices. I chose to have a child and go back to school, even when it felt like the world was telling me it would be too hard. But it stings to see how much they have, how much they've been given, and how little they seem to care about my struggles. It's not that I'm expecting handouts, but it would be nice to feel like they understand or at least acknowledge the weight of the burden I'm carrying. Instead, I feel invisible, like my hard work and sacrifices are being dismissed because I'm not living up to the standard they think is appropriate. What's worse is that I feel guilty for even thinking this way. I don't want to be the person who feels entitled to other people's money. I don't want to be the person who resents their family for being successful, for having opportunities I could only dream of. I know it's not their fault that I'm in the position I'm in, and I don't want to be the person who resents them for their good fortune. But when I see how much easier their lives are, how little they have to worry about the future or financial stability, it's hard not to feel a little bitter. It feels like they have everything, and yet I'm still here struggling to make ends meet, working harder than ever just to survive. I can't help but wonder if things would be different if I had the kind of support they take for granted. The other day, I overheard my mom and stepdad talking about their next vacation. They're planning a month-long trip to Italy, complete with private tour, luxury accommodations, and a chef who'll be cooking for them at one of their rental villas. They were laughing and talking about what wine they'll pair with dinner and which towns they want to visit. It all sounded so effortless for them, like this is just another luxury they get to indulge in without a second thought. Meanwhile, I'm trying to figure out if I can afford to take my kid to the local zoo this month or if I should wait until the next paycheck comes in. It's not even about the zoo. I'd love to take my kids somewhere, anywhere that would make them happy, but it feels so trivial in comparison to what they're planning. There's no comparison, really. It's not just about the money, either. It's about feeling like an outsider in my own family. They'll talk about their investments, their properties, their vacations, and I just sit there quietly because I have nothing to contribute to the conversation. I'm not financially comfortable enough to join in with the talk about second homes or international trips. I've never been on a vacation that didn't involve scrimping and saving for months beforehand. And even then, it was usually just a weekend getaway to a nearby town. When I do bring up my struggles, how difficult it is to keep up with the bills, how hard it is to feel like I'm getting ahead, there's this uncomfortable silence. They'll brush it off or offer platitudes like, things will get better, or you just have to stay positive. Those words sting. Stay positive. It's easy to say when you're in a position where staying positive isn't a daily battle. But when you're in the trenches, fighting just to keep things together, hearing that kind of advice feels like a dismissal of your reality. It's like they're telling me that if I just think harder or work harder, I'll magically find a way out of my financial struggles. But I've been working hard for years and it hasn't gotten me far enough. And sometimes no amount of positivity will change the fact that the numbers just don't add up. I feel so isolated and, frankly, hurt. I don't understand why they can't see how much I'm struggling. Or maybe they do see and they just don't care. Either way, it's exhausting. The emotional toll this is taking on me is immense. It's like I'm invisible to them unless they want to talk about their next big purchase or their latest financial success. When it's about me, when I try to share the reality of what my life is like, I'm met with silence or worse, shallow reassurances that feel hollow. It's like I'm not allowed to express any of my frustrations or vulnerabilities because they're too comfortable in their own world, too distant from the struggles I face every day. I haven't brought up the topic again since that conversation with my mom. Part of me feels like it's pointless. They're clearly not going to help, and pushing the issue would probably just make things worse. They've already shown me where they stand, and bringing it up again would likely lead to more dismissals or uncomfortable silences. So I've kept my mouth shut, but the resentment is eating away at me, and I don't know how to make it stop. It's like I'm carrying this heavy weight around, this constant, gnawing feeling of being overlooked and unheard, and I don't know where to put it. Am I wrong for feeling this ways? Should I just suck it up and keep grinding, hoping things will change on their own? Should I keep pushing forward, even when it feels like the people closest to me aren't offering any support or empathy? Or is it okay to feel a little resentment when your family has the means to help but doesn't? Is it okay to feel frustrated that I'm doing everything I can to get by while they float through life without a care in the world, untouched by the struggles I face? I don't want to be bitter, but I also don't know how to reconcile this anger with the love I have for them. How do you let go of resentment when it feels so justified? Update: I've been doing a lot of thinking since I last posted, and honestly, I'm still stuck in this same emotional space. The resentment hasn't gone away, and neither has the feeling of being invisible in my own family. I've tried to remind myself that my struggles are mine to navigate and that I'm doing the best I can, but it's hard not to feel the sting when I see my family living their lives so comfortably while I'm just trying to stay afloat. A couple of days ago, my mom brought up her upcoming Italy trip again. She was going on and on about the places they'd visit, the private guides they'd have, and how much they were looking forward to all the luxury. Honestly, I just smiled and nodded, but it hit me even harder this time. I thought about my own kid and how I can barely afford to get us to the park, let alone anywhere more exciting. I've decided that I need to focus on my own growth, even if that means I have to do it alone. I'm not going to get the help I thought I needed or wanted from them, and I've got to stop waiting for them to come through. So I'm doubling down on my work and school, trying to stay focused on getting my degree and finding new opportunities, even if it feels like an uphill battle. It's still hard, and I won't pretend I'm not bitter at times, but I think I'm finally starting to accept that I might never get the kind of support I hoped for from my family. Instead of dwelling on that, I'm trying to build the future I want for myself and my child one step at a time. It's not perfect and it's not easy, but it's mine. Thanks for all your advice and support. It really helped to know I'm not alone in feeling this way.